Hey, CLC family, welcome to our Sermon Q&A podcast on this Holy of Holy Weeks. It is Tuesday in Holy Week. There's no day like prescribed for Tuesday, is there?
Was he cleansing the temple, cursing the fig tree?
Okay.
Maybe, that we don't really have exactly the days when those followed.
Sure, okay. I was curious. There's a little side tangent. That's not why we're here, but we do want to remind you that we have some pretty cool things happening at the CLC this week for Holy Week. Actually, so tomorrow there's no cow, so don't show up here. You'll be by yourself. It'll just be you and Jesus, which is not a bad thing. But Thursday, we'll be at the NLPC for our Maundy Thursday service, and that's at 7 p.m. And then Friday, right here at the CLC, we have a Good Friday service right here, also at 7 p.m. And the way you've been kind of describing it is if kids can sit in class during the day, then this is probably really accessible to them. So we invite you, bring them out to these spaces. Hopefully it's just as meaningful as for them as it will be for you. And then, of course, on Sunday, 2 services, 9 o'clock and 10:45. Right here at the CLC. I love how you explained it maybe a week or so ago. Like, hey, bring a plate of cookies to your neighbor and then say, hey, do you want to come to church with me? Because that's like the biggest indicator that someone would come to church is just an invitation, right?
It is. If they respect you and they're in a relationship with you, there's a relational context. And, relationship, I heard somebody say, like in John 4, Jesus developed a relationship with that woman at the well, even though he never met her. But it was in a relational, it didn't feel like a drive-by as they had that conversation that he was just selling her something that she wasn't asking about, you know?
Yeah.
So I think that's an art. But yes, definitely. It is one of those weekends that people are willing to attend.
Yeah, they are. So just invite them, bring them some cookies. I like cheesecake. If you bring me cheesecake, I will come. Man. Just kidding, I'll be here already. So, but yes, we want to just encourage you. And if you have any questions on any of that, or if you're looking for more information, visit our website, clcfamily.church/Easter. You got all the information you might need right there.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
Best week of the year.
Yeah, it's going to be great. I'm excited. Awesome. Well, we're going to jump into our podcast. This is episode 10, and we're talking Palm Sunday. That was kind of the sermon series that we're in. So I'm going to do what I usually do. I'm going to start the timer. We're going to do 2 minutes of sermon recap, about 7 minutes of chatting and more in depth about the sermon, and then the last 8 minutes of actually answering some of your questions. So you ready to go?
Yeah,
all right.
Sure.
Here we go. 2 minutes starting now. Here we go.
Yeah, so Palm Sunday really is it's the time that after 3 years of Jesus saying, my hour's not yet, my time's not yet, don't tell anybody this. Although he did some very public things, like resurrect a few people and things like that.
Yeah.
Resuscitate people, I guess you could say technically, resuscitating them back to this life. He did, always have some caution about any public demonstration, especially one saying that he was king. And all that caution was no more. And all of a sudden, he's staging this public demonstration and encouraging, the children, saying if these are silent, these stones will cry out. Maybe pointing to the tombs of the prophet. We were in Israel scene where he came by and was like, those are the tombs of the prophets. He's saying these stones. So was he saying there'd be a resurrection? I don't know. But at any rate, he was very much embracing, like, I am the king of Israel. And I am the one who is to come. And accepting all of that real worshipful responses to him. And I think that's what sets Palm Sunday apart. But the way he did it, coming lowly on a donkey in peace, humble, was anticipating the way a king in the ancient Near East would have come in. They would have recognized that as saying, this is the way a king comes. Hooray, he is here.
Yeah.
And just kind of walking through that incredible opening of this week that takes up most of the focus of the Gospels. They're either anticipating the coming of this week where Jesus would die, or they're actually living out, like in John's Gospel, it's chapter 12 all the way to the end are just the next 6 days of Jesus' life, and that's Easter Sunday.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's a powerful focus for us as Christians.
This is like the first domino of Holy Week that kind of sets the stage for the rest of it. In some ways. I mean, aside from the whole ministry of Jesus for 3 years. But
it does. One thing I love about it unites us with the church around the entire world.
Yeah.
That everybody is kind of anticipating. Our salvation didn't drop out of the sky, and somebody wrote a novel about it. But took place in history.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah,
Awesome. Appreciate that. And so now we're going to talk a bit more in depth about it. There are a lot of things that kind of you talked about. I remember you took your jacket off and threw it on the ground. If you're watching, you know what he was referencing there. And then just kind of other things that you're highlighting about, like regime changes. So if you could, is there anything that maybe you wanted to say on Sunday that you couldn't say? And then we can kind of dive into some of those other things.
Yeah, so many things I want to do over every Sunday after you finish.
Oh, yeah.
But I would say that whole thing you mentioned of regime change, I do think like we all have the point of contact with the gospel of realizing that things are not the way we want them to be. And what the Bible says, it's very encouraging to me, is that this is not the way they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And so we want regime change, but I often just want my external circumstances to improve without realizing it's got to come at a heart level.
Yeah.
So I do really find like just realizing that I've got to welcome Christ at that level to come into the internal part of my life and to do that rearranging in my own life. And that's what the gospel really does say, is his first coming came to really deal with from the inside out where change happens. And imagine if he changed our circumstances, we'd be right back to Eden, except we would be messed up.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, that's true.
And what Jesus does is he says, no, we're not doing that. We're going to fix this propensity toward evil, toward sin, toward marring the image of God. And then I'm also going to then place you in that perfect circumstance, the new heavens, the new earth that we long for. So I just love how this is Jesus' solution to our fallenness.
Yeah.
You know, that the world was awesome. Which we need to emphasize.
Yeah.
The world is not just first broken. The world and even us as image bearers first are endowed with this goodness. But we're also broken. And Christ came not only to forgive us, but then he's taking us somewhere. Yeah. You know, and restoring us to that. That's the full picture of the gospel that excites me about being a Christian and just recognizing what Jesus did.
So you say it has to kind of begin at a heart level, kind of. I like that image of we could fix your circumstances, but then you, who are so prone to actually mess them up, needs also some redemption and restoration. So for anyone who's watching and they're like, I want that, I want God to do a work in me. What does it kind of look like, and where does someone start if they want God to kind of renovate their soul, or even rip out the old, put in the new type thing?
Yeah.
What does that look like to?
I think of how, and I think somebody said, Augustine said it first, but I think it's very much in the Bible that part of what trips us up is we have disordered loves. And it's not even that we love bad things. Sometimes that's true. Yeah. But it's that we love good things in a wrong way. Yeah. Yeah. You know, and that we put pressure on them that then distorts those things as well as us, you know. So like with our children, and you're in an exciting phase of parenting, you know, but you can't make your identity your children. You'll place a weight on them that they don't want you to see them as your identity. Yeah. And you can't love them well or be who you are or have them be who they are. Like, so that's the kind of thing that Jesus comes and gives a different order to. Yeah. You know, and a different sense of calling to. Yeah. So I think that's part of it. It always is repentance, you know, and turning, but also it's displacing those things with what is right, what should be enthroned there. Yeah. Yeah, and so that's, you know, that's what the gospel does for us. Yeah. It's not just this transactional forgiveness and then, okay, when I mess up, I'm forgiven. Yeah. But it is a whole new way of living out a life calling. And honestly, I think that's what I find most compelling and attractive about Christianity. Yeah. Is it really does fit where I see in my own life the need, you know? It just fulfills that so perfectly. Yeah. And it varies a lot from maybe what we've grown up hearing about, like just this Holy Week of, like, you know, sometimes we reduce it to a prayer and then without kind of all that renovation taking place, perhaps, or what we would call discipleship. And I don't know, any other thoughts or comments on maybe what we've grown up hearing about the gospel and Holy Week and how we ought to respond versus maybe what the scriptures are inviting us into? Yeah, I know for me, I grew up in a more mainline church that never talked about the cross being something that I needed for God to overthrow evil in my life, the world, you know, and the place where sin was dealt with. It was just only an example. And I think it is an example. You know, it is the way we should love our enemies. It is the way, it is beautiful in that. But I can't follow that example or even want to unless I I deal with it personally.
Yeah.
But I do think for other large sections of the church, it's just almost a fire insurance, deal with my personal individual guilt. And there is no calling to be part of that solution.
Yeah.
I think, again, we've talked about this before, Christian, but like if we start with Genesis 3 and it's a broken world, then all we've got is the forgiveness of that and the wiping it clean.
Yeah.
But if we start with Genesis 1 and 2, and we say, like, this is the vision of God, and we're like as N.T. Wright says, we're middle managers, of the reality God has, and he loves to work through us. Then once we're back in relationship with God, then that calling continues. And so I'm looking forward to heaven that is not sitting on a cloud passively, just singing praise songs, but a heaven where, like, I'm gardening or building bridges or, I don't know, exploring galaxies maybe.
Yeah,
who knows?
cool. Yeah.
But like we're active, we're doing things.
Yeah.
And we're tasting and feasting and dancing and rejoicing.
Yeah. I feel like it's a much more thorough and, not to say enticing, like I think that kind of meets us where we're at, because it is a much fuller picture of what things I think will be like, but it's a much more beautiful picture too, where God is so very much interested in also having roles, kind of like in heaven, and tasks, and kind of being I like that phrase, middle managers in some ways, but a little bit different, of course, but a much more fuller picture of what things could be like. And I think we settle for a far less enticing or far less, relevant picture of that. But anyway.
Absolutely.
But what else in your sermon maybe did you not get to that you're really hoping to kind of land on that you just couldn't?
When I think about, I talked to someone about the children and their place in leading that, and I think that there's such a beautiful picture there for the church of Jesus, and even what masculinity is, and even what strength is. And so not just riding on a mule, not riding on a lowly donkey, but I think just this whole relational context was beautiful. And so I think you could spend a whole sermon on that. What does the masculinity and the force and kingly power of Jesus look like? Because I've read, just how that has so come into a lot of quarters of the evangelical church, where we've adopted this very worldly, muscular, military masculinity that makes all these assumptions that are not there. And I think this portrait of Jesus surrounded by children, praising crowds, and just all the people that he notices on the way to the cross show us a really beautiful portrait of what it means to be human. What it means to be masculine too, but I just think the humanity, like you're not less of a human because you're male. And so in the context of today, that maybe that's something worth drawing out of the text and reflecting on.
That could be a whole sermon series too.
Definitely it could.
A good one.
Maybe a sermon series on masculinity and femininity and what it is and what it is not. We probably have to spend more time on what it's not.
Right.
In some ways than we would like to. But
All right, appreciate that. Then the last portion, we have some questions via email that we'll go over. We'll go from there. So I'm going to put 8 minutes here. Let me see. I always forget how to do this thing. Here we go. All right. First question. Let's see here. I want to make sure I don't miss anything. Okay. First question is, before we are motivated to ask Jesus for his regime change in our lives, does God have to make the first move?
Well, one way to look at that question, I was thinking about it, is God has always made the first move. He's a creator from absolutely nothing. He's always the one moving toward us in love. He's the one wooing us. And so I think it is helpful to realize God is already speaking to everybody in the world, and the Holy Spirit is already working in all of the world. And sometimes our role as Christians or in the church is to say, if that conversation is shut down for some reason, we would like to help you recognize that it's only on your side that it's shut down. God is having that conversation with you. And the Bible does emphasize pretty boldly and put a very strong accent on God's initiative. He loved us first. He's reaching out to us. His kindness is already there, leading us to repentance. But we have to be careful with that it's never an excuse for our saying we don't have something to respond to. I think what the gospel does is it says, okay, Jesus has gone the whole distance now.
Yeah.
Are you going to receive that?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's how I would put it. But I do think unless God is the one who takes the first and the primary step toward us, it can lead us into a kind of works mentality that says, because I was spiritual, because I was the spiritual person in my home, I was spiritually sensitive, which is just not true for anybody. It's God. Whatever responsiveness we have to God, what Paul says, what do you have except that which you have received? And if you received it, why do you boast? So I think that's the concern of the Bible, is to say, realize that everything you have, you've received. And it's a gift.
Yeah, that's good. So, I think the Methodists have a word for it, like prevenient grace. That, hopefully I'm not botching up that doctrine, but it's this idea that there's grace ahead of us. Kind of even that grace is even enabling us to respond in some capacity and encounter God. So, served at a Methodist church for a couple of years and picked
when you read Wesley's sermons, which I read some of them, I was so impressed by how much he emphasized God's prior work in enabling people to hear, to perceive, to be called. He was very big on that. More than so many so-called Calvinists are today. So, even our ability to engage in this podcast or engage in a Sunday morning, it's like God is showing us His grace in some ways that we can kind of encounter those spaces. So I don't know. That's how I like to see it a little bit. Awesome. Second question. Is this what's behind Ephesians 1:4, that He chose us before the foundation of the world? And so I guess he's referencing this idea of God making the first move. Would we say that Ephesians 1:4 is a reflection of that reality? Yeah, and I think, that Ephesians 1:4, and I think of Romans 8:29, where it says, those whom He predestined, He also did foreknow. And to be foreknown is a word of intimacy, and of actually knowing us beforehand. When we get into the eternal counsels of God, like He's already there, but He's already in tomorrow. My mind starts to bend.
And it probably should, right?
It should. And realize that. But again, there is this prior loving, gracious plan of God. I pretty much understand the emphasis of the Bible is there for all that is good. He's preordained it and pre-connected me with it. I have a sense that when you look at the other side of it, that there isn't this action of foreordaining and foreknowing and predetermining, but that it is more of just God passing by or people not responding to the active love of God. I think it's stated differently in the Bible. But I do think the positive, loving determination of God is a very powerful source. And it's ahead of us. And behind us. And above us and below us.
Yeah, right. That's really good. That's that. What's that Irish that prayer that's prayed on St. Patrick's Day often? It's the prayer of St. Patrick. It kind of talks about that too.
I think he's entering that.
Or it's an invitation for God to be, before us, behind us, above, beneath type thing. Anyway, great prayer. But awesome. Third question is, Bob mentioned that Jesus takes full authority for an outer regime change. How does that transformation happen?
Yeah. Well, when I think of outer regime change, I do think like the conforming of everything in this earth with the way it's supposed to be. And the New Jerusalem comes down out of heaven and fills this earth. And so when I think of regime change, I think what's happened in a lot of evangelical circles has been a very questionable and unbiblical kind of beam me out of here. Get me out of here. Let me escape. God would never allow Christians to suffer tribulation. And I just don't find that in the New Testament. But what I find is God is going to bring it down here. Mm-hmm. So I really think I have a passion for the church to trade in the beam me up escapism for a bring it down and make me an agent of that here.
Yeah, that's good.
I've heard, I know Charles Spurgeon had a sermon that impacted me, and I read it many years ago, where he said that in heaven there is going to be some greater satisfaction for those who said, I was working toward this on earth, and now I'm seeing it in completion. Yeah. So the removal of all diseases, or areas of injustice where we see a reconciled, diverse church. And for people who say that was my life's work, and now I'm seeing Jesus complete all those strokes. It makes it wonderful. And Martin Luther used to say, if I knew Jesus was coming tomorrow, I'd plant a tree. Because the world is going to be restored even in its environment and cosmically, and I can take delight.
Yeah.
You know? So there will be a correspondence. It'll blow our minds. I don't think Chester County will look exactly the same, but what about the beautiful rolling hills and the pure streams and they'll just be more than ever.
Yeah.
And this will be such a habitable place to live.
Yeah.
Beyond our wildest dreams. But we ought to be doing that now.
Yeah, prepping it. I mean,
we ought to be prepping
ushering it in. Yeah.
And participating in it.
Yeah.
And again, that's kingdom work that he calls us to. And the gospel is an invitation to give your life to that kingdom, you know, and to be part of that regime change now in obviously only nonviolent ways. I will say when Jesus brings it, there may be, you know, a bit of that force and coercion. It's going to the universe is going to give birth to something that it was intended to be. And our part now is to peacefully promote what he's going to finish. Best as I can understand it. But that will be the resurrection, like what Jesus does to our bodies with correspondence, but so much better than what we have now. I can't wait to pass through walls, and I don't know, will we be able to just I can just appear in France? I don't know.
That'd be
but
kind of cool.
I think there's so many capabilities Jesus' body had that a human body before resurrection doesn't have. You know? And he was resurrected never to die again. Whereas Lazarus was just resuscitated and, you know, was going to have to go through some kind of death again. So Jesus is the first person who has ever been resurrected.
So, a lot to look forward to. And a totally different picture of, like, the beauty of Easter and what God is doing. Like, today, tomorrow, and what ultimately will kind of come about with, you know, heaven coming back to earth. If you can give one last invitation or one last word to wrap up, what would you invite everyone to?
I don't think there's a greater hope for any of us to drink in. And there's something about drinking it all in together that I just say to invite a friend into that and to have conversation about that. I mean, I don't think Chester County has too much hope. I don't think our world has too much hope. And I think, I don't know, coming out of COVID and all the things of the last 3 years this should be an especially joyful Easter. I hope around the globe. I hope it is a time of real ingathering. And we've been praying around each of the places that people would enter CLC's facilities, from outdoors to children's ministry to this platform and the place where the word is preached and worship is led. And just praying with expectancy that God will really minister hope and healing to people's hearts. And for all the things that disappoint us, I'm looking forward to preach from the Emmaus Road and just those, you know, Jesus, everybody has a resurrection-shaped hole in their life and grief, and that is where hope is found. So I'm excited about what we have to offer as a church.
We really hope to see you there. Again, if you have questions about any of that, you can email us or just check out the website, clcfamily.church/Easter. It's got everything you might need and then more. So, well, hey, thanks for tuning in to this podcast on this Holy of Holy Weeks. We appreciate you guys. We love you guys, and we'll see you real soon. Take care.